Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Jasmine today with Cake Skincare Creations. Today what we're going to do is we're going to make a sugar scrub. Sugar scrubs have various different types of textures. They can be more loose, they can be firm. They kind of change over time depending on what your formula calls for. They can get pretty tedious and specific, I should say. So I'm going to give you the deets on this good scrub that I love. So here is the recipe, but don't worry, in case you don't get a chance to pause the screen, it's also listed below with everything that you are going to need to make this scrub, the entire ingredients list, links, all that good stuff. So first and foremost, we're going to be mixing shea butter. I do with this one for a more smooth and creamy type of scrub that doesn't firm up. I chose shea butter. You really want to use a softer type of butter in this recipe because of the fact that other butters, depending on what you want, it's totally okay. I do love cocoa butter in the formulas and mango butter, cocoa, but they can firm up a little bit over time, so they can be a little bit more trickier to formulate, but you can switch out it with any other butter if you want. And then I have um, the emulsifier and then cetyl alcohol to give it like a rich creamy type of texture. So here we're going to create a slurry, and a slurry is just basically where you're going to be mixing powders ultimately in water, but you don't want to get them to be too chunky or clumpy. So I have guar gum as a conditioning agent. It makes it so that the surfactant isn't so harsh on the skin. And this is our powdered surfactants, which if you look at this recipe, we use two. We use a liquid surfactant, cocoa betaine, and then we use you can use SCI or SLSA. It just depends on your preference, but they really help to give it a nice lather and boost your bubbles and foam to get a nice creamy type of lather. So you're going to add your powders to the vegetable glycerin first and just make it so that, even though it may not always be like super runny, that's fine. You just want them to be mixed evenly. And then here I'm adding the cocoa betaine to the mix first. And that makes it so that as you can see, it's still going to mix pretty evenly here, and it's not going to start to chunk up or clump or anything like that yet. I just mix it and just try to get it all the lumps out as much as you possibly can. You want to make sure that you do this because in your final mixture, what can happen is you can have little lumps and areas that didn't mix all the way thoroughly, so you won't get the same smooth end result. So once you create the slurry and get everything in there, then you're going to go ahead and start to add your distilled water. You can, depending on what type of scrub you're going to make, you could add hydrosols in this point, or like rose water, something like that. But always use distilled water whenever you're doing waters. And if you're going to add any other elements like coffee to make it a coffee scrub or anything like that, you want to make sure that you're going to have water being the bigger portion of your waters. And so I'm combining them. You will see that the gums will begin to thicken. It still looks pretty liquidy, but depending on with any sort of thickener and any sort of gum, it's going to begin to get thick a little bit. But you just want to make sure that you gently mix. You don't want to, the bubbles are going to get mixed anyway, but in the beginning, generally, like if you're using something like this to make a body wash, for example, you would want to make sure that you don't mix it too much and create so much foam and lather. So now after we've added all of our liquids together, we're going to do our oils and butters. So you want to do it quickly so that it doesn't begin to harden. And it's going to start to get pretty thick almost instantly here. Makes for kind of a nice bath and shave butter. And this is actually like the base for mine. So it makes a lot of good bubbles. You're going to see as I mix it in, it's going to start to thicken up pretty substantially here. And if it is too thick for you, you can add, depending on what you want the outcome to be, a little bit more oil or a little bit more water. If you're going to add water, you want to be careful and add very small amounts because it could make it too runny. You'll see how it's getting nice and thick. And then on the other hand, if you're going to add oils, do a very small amount and make sure that your oils do not exceed the amount of water that you have in your given recipe, because then it'll cause separation and break the emulsion, because this is a oil and water emulsion, meaning that the majority, in order for your emulsifier to emulsify, it needs to have more water than oils. So you're just going to make sure that you get it as far as it'll go with your immersion blender. Try to get everything in there. And at this point, depending on what you're doing with it, you could also add your preservative and your waters. Sorry, not your water, your preservative and your colors. And that way it can mix more evenly throughout the scrub, because once you add in the sugar, it's just more to mix per se. So I add in 2 different types of sugars if you notice. The caster sugar you need to add to give it kind of like a specific type of texture. You could do all regular sugar if you want to, or all caster. It's totally up to you. But I did also, so I made 2 different types of scrubs with this. In this portion, you see me adding in the caster sugar. The caster sugar is basically the sugar ground so fine that it's almost powdered, but not quite. So it does exfoliate. And it's more of like a gentle type of exfoliant, but still technically a mechanical exfoliant. I did this because I wanted to get the type of texture that I ended up getting, which is like more smooth and not necessarily so bumpy, but still a little bit. So it kind of looks more like cookie dough or like an ice cream scoop, if you will. But so right now I'm adding in the caster. In the second portion here, you guys are going to see me add in the regular sugar. This is where you could add the brown sugar if you wanted to make it more like a brown sugar scrub, especially if you're wanting to do like the cookie butter scrub. Brown sugar goes well with that because it makes it that nice brown, rich color that you can get. So you just mix it in. I'm just mixing it in with the spoon thoroughly before I have to get my hand blender, because I'm going to have to do that. Not the immersion stick blender, because this is too thick for that at this point. But you're going to need to get like an electric mixer, as you're going to see me doing in a second here. So with scrubs, basically you can get any sort of texture. Some people like them more gentle. This texture is almost like the marshmallow fluff one, and you could leave it at this texture. But my personal opinion when it comes to scrubs is I like one that's much more abrasive. So I always add, I have made scrubs, formulated them to be a little bit less abrasive. And for that, you just use less sugar. But whenever you like something good and abrasive, like I like a good deep exfoliation. And I know people say it can be damaging to the skin. Personally, I love it. So I love a good deep exfoliation. So I always add more sugars. But if you want to get something that's not necessarily as exfoliating, you can, or that's not so harsh, if you will, you can use less sugar. It may be a little bit more runny, but I mean, it still can turn out to have a pretty cool end result. So I'm just getting it all mixed in here before I break out with the electric mixers. And just the more you mix it, the more you get it kind of turned in. See, I like how it's kind of smooth and you can play with it in your hands. And when you're making sugar scrubs, one thing that I've noticed is that even when you're planning on making a little bit, it can end up turning into a gigantic batch because you have to add so much sugar to accommodate the amount of oils and water and everything that you have to make it get to the right texture. So you can always use a batch size calculator in that event. And you can just make like a small amount if you want to. It may get harder to mix, especially with like an immersion blender and combining an emulsion, because you need to have a certain amount for it to be able to mix. But I mean, you could try it out. And then see, I just come in with my hand mixer here so I can make sure that everything is mixed smoothly. And I absolutely adore this texture. This texture reminds me so much of cookie dough and ice cream at the same time. And it's so nice and smooth, but it's good at exfoliating. And this scrub, because of the surfactant blend that I use, is going to get a nice lather, a rich, creamy lather. And scrubs are best used before, I would say, before you shave. I didn't realize this all my years until I ended up trying it on one of these, with one of the scrubs I made, because I saw it on Instagram. Somebody was doing a video, and I didn't really believe in it because I always get irritated after shaving. But as soon as I use an exfoliant before, it was amazing. So I adore this texture. It's really soft and creamy. Then as you're gonna see, you can play with it here. It's soft and creamy, but a little bit it has the guar gum, so it's conditioning. It gives it slip, but not so much that you can't exfoliate with it, just enough to give it a glide and really help that lather and leave the skin feeling extra soft. So you can add colors either in the earlier phase that I stated, or this phase, like I did for the cake scrub that I made, the cake shake scrub. And just depending on what you want to do with it, you could add jojoba beads, whatever you want to personalize it. So I hope that this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.